There's a scene where Phil Dunphy is about to lose a house sale. The buyer is hesitating. She's worried the place doesn't feel like somewhere kids would actually be happy. Right at that exact moment, Luke wanders into the room and starts gushing about how much he loves the house. The sale closes. Wait, that looks like an accident. Watch how many times this exact pattern repeats across the show, always landing exactly when Phil needs it to. This wasn't luck. So here's the real question this video is actually asking. What if the dumbest sounding man in this family was actually the smartest one the entire time? If you've ever suspected the goofiest person in a room might secretly be the sharpest one in it, subscribe now, because that's exactly the kind of thing this channel goes looking for. On the surface, Phil is easy to write off. He mangles sentences constantly, falls off skateboards, believes in magic a little too much for a grown man. That's the character the show sells you in the pilot, except go back and watch what he does for a living. He's a real estate agent over 20 years in, closing deals, eventually running his own agency. Bumbling idiots don't survive 2 decades in a commission-only business built on convincing strangers to trust you with the biggest purchase of their lives. Here's how he actually does it. Phil has a whole memorized system for selling houses, always be closing, don't ever forget, great home ideas, a structured method dressed up as a goofy acronym. That's not a joke, that's a sales framework. The kind top performers build for themselves in any competitive industry. The idiot theory starts falling apart right here. There's a moment where Alex reads off a list of symptoms for attention difficulty, hyperactivity, trouble focusing. Every symptom describes Phil, not Luke. The show plays that as a joke about Phil being a big kid, flip it around. The same traits that make him distractible in a boring meeting make him hyperattentive to whatever's actually interesting in the room, a nervous buyer's body language, a small detail nobody else catches. That's a brain wired to notice what other people tune out. Watch his hobbies with that same idea in mind. Phil does magic. Seriously, not a half-remembered party trick. Sleight of hand takes real patience, real repetition, real technical precision. Strip away the top hat, and what's left is a man capable of intense, disciplined practice. The opposite of the flaky idiot the family jokes about at dinner. Phil has a whole collection of sayings he calls his own philosophy, half inspirational, half nonsense on the surface. Most get laughed at in the moment. Go back and sit with one once the scene's over. Whenever you'd rather be right than get along, imagine if getting along mattered more. Strip the clumsy delivery away. And that's real advice about ego, the kind a therapist charges for. This is where everything starts to change. Watch how he handles Jay, a father-in-law who spends years making it clear he doesn't fully respect him. Phil doesn't avoid the tension, and he doesn't fight it either. He absorbs the jabs, keeps showing up warm, and slowly earns something like real affection by the end of the show. Managing a difficult relationship for years without losing your temper isn't something dumb people do. Then there's Claire. She's anxious, controlling, prone to spiraling. Phil is the one who consistently talks her down, right before tension tips into a real fight almost every single time, with exactly the right joke. That kind of timing isn't stumbled into for 20 years of marriage. The pattern grows. Now watch how he parents 3 kids and the staircase starts to climb. Claire gets space to be intense and competitive because that's what she responds to. Small proof, easy to wave off as coincidence. Luke gets patience and simple, direct language because that's what actually reaches him. Bigger proof now because it's not one kid anymore. It's a pattern holding across 2 completely different personalities. Alex gets treated like an equal, someone whose ideas are worth taking seriously, because that's exactly what she needs. That's the full staircase. A genuinely oblivious parent doesn't manage that range. At this point, you could still argue Phil is just naturally nice, no strategy required. Some people are simply easy to be around. Honestly, that's exactly what this looks like on paper, until you watch what happens next. He notices things before anyone says them out loud. Late in the show, Phil gets a call that his own father was found wandering around the grocery store he used to run, confused, unable to explain why he was there. Phil doesn't wait to see if it happens again. He flies out immediately to check on him himself, and while they're together, he asks Frank something he's never asked before, whether his dad ever wished he'd had another child. He clocks it early, before anyone else in the family even knows there's something to clock. Now the picture starts to change. Phil knows exactly what his kids are into at exactly the moment they're into it. He speaks fluent teenager, fluent gamer, fluent whatever trend just showed up that week. A genuinely clueless dad doesn't stay that current for that many years. Phil skateboards, flips off a diving board, runs a signature karate chop routine he calls the Cobra. Falling is part of the bit. Watch what happens right before the fall, almost every time. Real control, real coordination, choreographed to land exactly on cue. Watch how he treats Mitchell and Cam from the very beginning, before the rest of the family fully catches up. He doesn't perform acceptance loudly, like it's a lesson he's proud of learning. He just treats them like any other couple, immediately. That matters more than it looks like it should. There's an elderly neighbor named Walt living alone, mostly forgotten by everyone else on the street. Phil is the one who actually stops by, not once out of guilt, regularly for years, bringing him something small, checking in on a man nobody else thought to check on. That single habit is about to matter more than anything else in this video. Now everything connects. Every once in a while, somebody outside the family says the quiet part out loud. A rival agent grudgingly admits Phil's numbers are better than they should be for someone who acts the way he does in meetings. A client, skeptical at the open house, specifically requests him for their next 3 moves. That's the family's running joke, failing to survive contact with the people who actually evaluate his performance for a living. There's a version of Phil that shows up during a real crisis, and it's almost unrecognizable from the fumbling dad the show leans on for laughs. When something actually goes wrong, Phil doesn't dissolve into panic. He gets calm, focused, fast, decisive, exactly when it matters most. After the family nearly gets into a serious car accident, that same shift happens in an even sharper form. Phil spends the rest of that day in shock, and something in him drops the usual disguise completely. He tells off a fellow agent who's spent years quietly disrespecting Claire, sharp and direct, no joke, softening it. He talks an appliance store into fixing an in-law's broken machine on the spot, through sheer force of will. That's not a new personality appearing out of nowhere. That's the same sharp instinct that's always been running underneath, finally let out without the disguise on top of it that matters later. Watch a tough negotiation, and the same skill shows up again, dressed as charm. A rival agent named Mitzi Roth swoops in and steals a listing right out from under him. The biggest one of his career, Phil doesn't scream, doesn't threaten, doesn't burn the relationship down trying to win it back through force. He plays it patient, lets his own kid's genuine, unscripted reaction to the house do the actual selling, and slowly turns the whole situation back in his favor. The best negotiators make the other side feel the deal was their own idea. There's a flipped house Claire and Cam renovate together that turns out much harder to sell than anyone expects. Phil is confident going in, the way he always is, and the market humbles him anyway. Instead of giving up on the listing, he pulls the whole family into a set of increasingly elaborate, slightly desperate strategies to move it. Staging, timing, and reworking how the place gets shown to buyers. It's messy, and some of it looks ridiculous in the moment. But notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't quit on a hard sale, and he doesn't stop adjusting his approach until something actually works. That kind of stubborn, creative problem-solving under pressure isn't the profile of someone who just gets lucky when the wind's blowing the right way. There's a poker night where Phil loses on purpose, badly, obviously, just to keep the night friendly instead of letting Jay's competitive streak wreck the evening. Nobody at the table clocks it in the moment, losing on purpose. Cleanly enough that nobody notices, takes more control than winning would. Claire spends years insisting Phil doesn't have it in him to actually scare her, that he lacks the edge for it. So Phil spends months quietly building an elaborate plan to finally pull it off, right down to a fake skeleton rigged with real precision. Nobody in the house clocks the buildup happening, because he never once tips his hand early. Months of patient, invisible planning aimed at a single payoff is not something a man who can't plan ahead is capable of pulling off. Look at his career with all of this sitting there. Early on, he's a single agent competing against sharper-dressed rivals who assume they'll outclose him easily. They don't. There's an episode where the rest of the family openly admits they have zero confidence Phil can actually handle a real parenting problem. By the end of it, even the show's own framing has to concede. There might be a method to his madness after all. That's not subtext. That's the writers saying it almost directly, then immediately going back to the joke, as if nobody noticed. By the later seasons, he's training other agents, running his own agency, eventually teaching real estate as a professor to people half his age. Gloria, sharp and driven in her own right, chooses Phil specifically to learn the business from when she becomes an agent herself. Someone that competitive doesn't apprentice herself to an actual idiot. She apprentices herself to the person she's quietly clocked as the best in the room. By the later seasons, he's training other agents, running his own agency, someone people study instead of underestimate. That's another crack in the idiot theory. Watch how Phil himself actually changes season to season, and a different shape appears underneath all this evidence. Early on, he's constantly performing, cracking jokes a beat too fast, trying visibly hard to be liked, to be the cool dad, to prove something to Jay that Jay never asked him to prove. By the middle seasons, something settles. He stops auditioning for approval in the family and at work, and just does the job quietly without needing anyone to notice. By the later seasons, and especially by the finale, nobody in that house questions him the way they used to. Jay trusts him. Claire leans on him without a second thought. Even Alex, the hardest one to win over, stops treating him like an accident waiting to happen. That's not a man who got lucky repeatedly. That's a man who spent years earning something quietly while everyone assumed he was just being himself. So maybe Phil is just naturally likable and none of this required any real strategy at all. That would be a decent place to stop. Except there's a bigger reversal sitting underneath everything so far. What if the goofiness isn't hiding the intelligence by accident? What if Phil is using it on purpose? Clients relax around him because he doesn't feel threatening. Jay lowers his guard because he assumes there's nothing to guard against. Looking harmless isn't a flaw Phil lives with. It's a tool he's been quietly using his entire life. Up until now, everything we've looked at could still be coincidence, a lucky salesman, a patient father, a charming husband who happens to time his jokes well. But there's one scene that makes every piece we've covered connect into a single picture. And after this one, it's almost impossible to call Phil the idiot again. Remember Walt, the neighbor Phil kept checking on for years? The one nobody else bothered with. Walt dies still estranged from his own daughter. They never fixed it. They ran out of time, and neither of them ever said the thing that actually mattered. Phil watches that happen up close, and something in him refuses to let the same gap open between himself and Alex, the daughter who treats him like he's a little embarrassing. So he doesn't wait for a natural moment to arrive on its own. He builds one on purpose, driving her out for a whole night to manufacture the kind of memory most parents assume will just happen eventually. It goes wrong. He tries too hard, forces it, ends up delivering a stranger's baby on the side of the road just to give Alex a story worth telling later. Alex asks him, point blank, why he's acting so strange tonight. Phil tells her the truth. He doesn't want to become Walt. He doesn't want to run out of time with her the way Walt ran out of time with his own daughter, having never once said the thing that actually mattered. That's the scene, a distracted, Oblivious Man doesn't spend years quietly checking on a lonely widower, absorb the lesson of his death, and then rebuild his own fatherhood around it before it's too late. Only someone paying far closer attention than anyone gives him credit for does that. Years later, that exact same lesson comes back around, except this time it's Phil's own father. Frank dies of old age, and Phil stands in front of the whole family to say goodbye to him. He doesn't perform grief for the room. He says one simple thing plainly, that his father was okay, and that the real lesson from their last day together was this: don't miss the chance to let the people you appreciate know it. That's not a coincidence sitting next to the Walt story. That's the same idea, confirmed twice in two different scenes years apart, by the one character everyone in this family assumed was too distracted to notice anything that mattered. So, back to that house showing and the sale that closed the second Luke walked in. Every time Phil says exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, this family calls it luck. It was never luck. Maybe that's why this show had to make Phil the funny one, because if they'd shown you clearly how much he actually understood about every person in that house, there wouldn't have been much comedy left to work with. The family idiot was never really there. Just the best trick a magician can ever perform, keeping everyone watching the wrong hand for 11 straight years. I'd love to know if you ever caught yourself watching the wrong hand too. And if you like finding the character everyone assumes is the dumbest one in the room, subscribe because there's more waiting here.